Hello guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we are talking about Here Lies Love, which I saw at the Broadway Theater on Tuesday night. I don't know why I'm giving you specifics, but that's what it is. First off, I will say that I thought the cast was immensely talented. I did not see Ariel Jacobs as Imelda. I saw her understudy or her alternative, and she was amazing in the part. I thought she did a fantastic job of portraying all the different characteristics of Imelda, and it felt like a fleshed out character. I know a lot of people are saying it's a lot of style over substance, and I see that, but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily agree either, because I feel like there is a lot of substance within the piece, but the thing is that it's all music and it's kind of very pop and colorful, so I can see why some people might say it's, you know, style over substance, but the lyrics and the subtleties and the nuances of the performances and the lyrics is what makes the piece so deep. You know, there's a lot of lyrics that are in the show. I'm not going to go through them, but they basically really go into the themes of it. I think the issue with you, or you know, I don't want to get into the issues. I'm talking positives and I'll talk issues. I thought the set was amazing. I think this has Tony's for scenic, lighting, costume, all of those technical stuff in the bag. And I think Alex Timbers, he might get another Tony win. He's definitely getting a nomination, because I think that the big star of this was the directing. And I think the directing choices were awesome. I think this was his most strongest work from like a character stance and from a dramatical sense. This felt kind of like what I wanted Moulin Rouge to be like. I prefer this over Moulin Rouge, and they're very similar because they're both immersive and got very poppy scores. But yeah, so overall, I thought that the controversy around the show is, does it glorify the muggers? I don't think it does. When I saw the show, there was maybe like one or two instances where I thought maybe that might come off as a little bit like disrespectful or kind of like insensitive, but like if you see the story and everything, you understand why they made those two choices. So besides those two moments, I thought that it followed it's a very objective way of looking at history. It's not picking a side. Normally people, I think in this day and age of cancel culture, black and white stuff, people want someone to choose a side or to, you know, spell out that they're against it. And this is objectively just telling the story as is. It's like, this was Imelda when she was younger, this is how she met, you know, her husband, and telling it through like a very poppy, colorful, bright, fun Broadway musical. And again, that's a form of telling a story in history that some people might not like. You know, I'm thinking about like, what if Jesus Christ Superstar or Parade came out today? Would it get received in the same way? I don't think it would, because if you remember in Parade, you know, the whole the Factory Girls song is like this very fun, poppy song, but it's, you know, some people might say that is disrespectful. Or when Jesus is crucified, they have this whole big number with like, superstar. So I can see why some people might have received it differently now than back then. I think that we're just in a very sensitive time in culture, and something like Here Lies Love, which is a bit more, you know, objective, might not work, if that makes sense. If you get what I'm giving to you. So I understand the criticism, but I don't think it's there, personally. I don't think it's there at all. And in a podcast I listened to, in Filipino culture, karaoke is like a huge cultural thing. And so a lot of the reason why it's in the Millennium Club and karaoke is because it's staying true to the Filipino culture. And it's very interesting that like 3 years ago, if anyone was criticizing this musical, they'd say, you're being racist and you're being insensitive, you know, and in a way, people still are actually, people that are like, you shouldn't see this because it glorifies them, and why is this karaoke, like, and why is this such a spectacle and fun, shows their ignorance in understanding the Filipino culture, and, you know, the reason why it was done the way it was done. So if anything, the karaoke part of it is honoring Filipino culture, which I think is super cool. And I think that, you know, if you listen to interviews with David Byron, Jose Lana, this podcast, you really get the sense of that they wanted to create something respectful, and that they were willing to look at the gray areas of Imelda and the Marcoses, because again, there's a lot of debate in the community, in the Filipino community, about did they do good stuff, did they do bad stuff, you know, it's a whole messy situation. But again, in today's culture, messy does not mesh well with mainstream, and that often leads to controversy. But yeah, again, I have nothing but love for this show. I highly recommend it. Definitely go and see it. I think it is the best show I've seen on Broadway since I've seen Akimbo, and that was back in February. Every other show hasn't come close to this, and I wish we got more shows like this because it is fun, it is a spectacle, it is creative, it is smart, it is original. There's so many things that happen in the show that I'm not going to even give away. I would normally give them away, but I don't want to give them away because they're just so cool to see. And having been, I sat in the orchestra, or whatever, or not in the orchestra, I sat in the mezzanine, and it was amazing to see. I could see everything. I do think that wherever you sit, you're going to get a good experience, pretty much. I think, obviously, if you sit in the back, you will get the least amount of experience. But even if you sit on the seats that are, like, here, you'll still get a good view. You might have to, like, lean over, but it's still a great view. I thought the DJ was awesome. I forget who he played, but it's his Broadway debut, and he has such charisma and showmanship, and he's so good in his part. I thought all the actors were great. I thought it was highly entertaining. The first half of the musical is very, and it's 90 minutes, so there's no intermission. It's very colorful and fun, and big, and it's like a big Broadway spectacle, but with substance in the lyrics and in the words and in the nuances. There's one scene where they sing about about the Marcos is getting elected them on the campaign trail, and we see just a very subtle thing, but Marcos basically is controlling Imelda and and correcting her movements when she's speaking out to the crowd, and it's little things like that that audiences might not necessarily get, that I think is why they say it's, style over substance. And let's get into the flaws. The flaws is I do think there are certain things that are too subtle in the musical. For example, there is Imelda's inner voice, and it's another person singing for Imelda, and Imelda is still moving about, but she's not singing. And that's never clearly explained or defined in the show, and so the only reason why I knew that is because I saw in the playbill Imelda's voiceover or whatever. So I think a lot of people might have been confused by that. I think another thing is that there was a moment, and this is going to spoiler territory, where they have to get some of the floorside people onto a platform, and so they basically say we're going into the 90s or whatever, and there's like a marching band and whatever, and it happens I think right after Solo Avenue, when Imelda's maid gets taken away. It happens after some big dramatic moment, and it just feels very tonally inconsistent, and it might come off as distasteful, but it's purely there for exposition to change the setup, but I feel like it just messes with the story, and I don't think it needs to be in there. And I think the other moment was that in Please Don't, which is one of the songs, and that's when Imelda is kind of, again, partying or whatever, but it's after a very serious dramatic moment, and it's when we're starting to see the bad side. We're seeing the bad side of Imelda is being exposed, and it's a very serious part of the show. And the DJ says, "Okay, all of the audience stand up and dance," and it feels a little bit weird that they would do that. I didn't dance. I stood up, but I didn't dance just because I wanted to see what was going on. And again, I think there's various theories as to why they have this immersive experience and they have people dance. I think it is because they're trying to appeal to mainstream American culture, because it is a story that a lot of people don't know about and they wouldn't want to come to unless there wasn't some fun involved. But I do, and some people are like, well, maybe it's making us feel guilty, or maybe it's making us as Americans feel like we're in the story of the Filipinos, and so, at that point, we are the Filipinos, we still are supporting America, and we go ignorant to things, or whatever. I think, why at certain points do they have his dance? I think that should be more clearly defined, because I feel like it causes some confusion, and that leads to assumed things that aren't true. So I do think that's one moment where I was like, why are we dancing, and what's the point? I feel like the point is, what is it though? So people come up with different interpretations, and maybe that's what's supposed to be, but I feel like this isn't White Girl in Danger or Strange Loop. I don't think it's meant to be left up to interpretation purely. So again, I don't know why that happened in that song particularly, and people are like, well, why do we immerse in this experience? And again, I do think it goes back to the Filipino culture and wanting to be in like a karaoke bar or whatever, but I do think at the same time it's just a bit confusing as to why people are there, and I don't think the creatives necessarily have a clear answer either. Again, my opinion personally is that we are just immersed in the story, and so we're moving through history in this story, and that's kind of it. But I do think that leads to assumptions and assume things that aren't true. There's some dramatical things in the script that I think could be strengthened or highlighted more. It is interesting because the DJ does leave in certain songs and then comes back, and if you only catch that if you're like in the mezzanine, you know what I mean? And there's so much going around, you might not even notice it. But I feel like it's a key part, and I think he goes away when the serious songs are there. But I wish that had been made a commentary and the DJ was maybe more in the center, or that was made more explicit, because I feel like that was a very poignant point of when the DJ left and came, and again, it's ever clearly explained. But again, I thought the second half of the show, when Imelda leaves and Nino is killed, all of that stuff made me get emotional. Just Ask the Flowers, Gate 37, beautiful songs. The show really comes alive in that second half. In my opinion, I think it's better than the first half, because they get to the meat and potatoes of what this is being. And I truly feel like this is not Imelda Marcos's story, and I don't think she's the main character. I think Ninoy is the main character, because I feel like I walked away from the musical sympathizing and loving him the most, and feeling like I got the most characterization out of him. And that's just my opinion, but I feel like for people that are against the show, I feel like personally this is a show about the hero that stood up to the Marcoses, because it is interesting that we don't get to the psychology and the state of mind of Imelda and Marcos, but we do get a lot more development with Ninoy, and I think that's because they kind of maybe want the Marcoses to stay as caricatures, or kind of superficial people, not get into the depths of them, because maybe they don't deserve it, or maybe they want to give more attention to Nino. I don't know, I just thought it seemed like it was it was a conscious choice. And I thought the final song was so beautiful, so subtle, so simple, and in a lot of ways it was like, wow, like, what if the whole show was kind of stripped down? And I think it could have made it even more powerful, but at the same time, I don't know, I just think that Hero Lies Loves could be done in a variety of different ways besides the way it's being currently done, and maybe be potentially better or even more powerful. I think this definitely has a lot of similarities to when Parade first opened. So again, I think that this was amazing despite its flaws. I think this was still such a good show. I want to see it again. You should go and see it. As for why it's not doing so well, again, I know Lea Salong left, and I now know why it dropped so heavily, and they're bringing in another Filipino star. And honestly, I think they're just going to have Filipino people coming in until the Tonys. So I do think they'll make it till at least next June or whatever, but I don't know if it's going to be here next year, because personally I don't think it's going to win Best Musical, and the only way it's going to stay open is if it wins Best Musical. And Best Musical does not mean the same thing it meant before COVID. Kimberly Akimbo, A Strange Loop, both closed in January, and I think How to Dance in Ohio is going to take the award, honestly, but they might give it to Here Lies Love, and I think Here Lies Love has a better chance at running longer than Kimberly and A Strange Loop, because it has the spectacle, it has, the big Broadway style stuff that tourists and people that want to go and see musicals want to see, so it might entice more people. And again, it's, like I said, to simplify, it is a very non-mainstream show being sold in a very mainstream way and formatted in a very mainstream way, but again, it's not for a 4-quadrant group. I mean, they go into Nino's affair and that gets really explicit, because obviously they actually you hear the actual tapes of his affair, which is pretty graphic stuff to listen to. There's people that get shot. There's people that gunshots and stuff like that. It's not meant for anyone that's like below the age of below 5th, 6th grade. I feel like 7th and 8th graders can see it, and obviously once you get to high school you can see it, but the story is very hard to follow, I think, for some people that aren't familiar with it. Like, it was certainly took me a hard time to follow along with it when I was listening to the album. Now, obviously, when I saw the show, I understood everything, but I think general audiences, because they don't know any of the history, it's so much that you're throwing at them that they're like, I'm digesting this, and so I don't know if the show was good or what it was trying to say. So I think there's a lot of confusion around it, and I think that there is just a sense of what? And I think there's people going out being like, oh my god, this is amazing, like I am. And why is that? I think that's because immersive theater has been done many times before. I think this is both simultaneously ahead of its time and after its time, because I think it was after its time is if it had come out in 2014, Great Comet, SpongeBob, Once on This Island, I think there's 2 other immersive shows that were on Broadway at one point. They've been done already, and so this concept isn't new to people. Historical musicals, we have 6, Hamilton, Scuffs, we have so many historical musicals that it really doesn't seem like a fresh exciting idea as it once was. And I do think that with obviously all the Marcoses coming back into power, and then all this stuff about democracy, people might see this as, for them, and so they might just instantly be turned off by it. And it's interesting how some people said, I only saw it because Lea Salong was in it, and that's why we bought tickets. And so why aren't you buying tickets without Lea Salong in it? Is it because you think that it's pro-Marcos or whatever? Again, people have very strong opinions on it. And I do think that the ticket prices are so overpriced that people can't afford to see it, and that's why the capacity is so low. You don't need to make it $100, but go from, I spent $208. Make it like $178 or $150 or $60. You know what I mean? Like, just reduce it just a little bit. Half of $200 is good. But it's such an expensive show to run that, again, I think the business model that they curated was just completely flawed from the start, and it was gonna never do years on Broadway. And again, I think that it's a lot for people to be thrown at, and I do think that the audience that I saw it with loved it. They seem to really enjoy themselves, but it just doesn't seem to be taking off the way it does. And I think, again, it's ahead of its time in the sense that we're in a very sensitive time, and so I think stuff like Here Lies Love will do better with culture and be better accepted in 20 years time. And I don't think it's necessarily that people aren't ready for it, but I don't know if they're necessarily ready for the kind of not black and white. You have to pick that you're either showing that this is either a pro-Marcos or anti-Marcos show, because we're in obviously the culture that we're in. And again, I do think that this is a very new, because in a lot of ways it's a new concept and a story and a history that not a lot of Americans know about, throwing it at them. And I think if we had more of that, obviously I think people would come and see it. And if there were less franchise musicals like Back to the Future, obviously Here Lies Love would do better. And I think if Here Lies Love was here before COVID, it would have always done better. And I think that there's so many more options for tourists to choose, so much easier stories to follow. And again, with how high the ticket prices are, they're like, we don't know anything about this. It's essentially an original musical, even though it's not an original musical, it's based off of history. It's essentially an original musical to audiences. And so I think that, again, original musicals that cost like millions of dollars is very risky, and there's a reason why it's not done in this current climate anymore, and that's because franchise musicals is king. MJ the Musical, Back to the Future, Funny Girl, Moulin Rouge, like these make $1 million, and the tourists, the New York audiences, people come see it a second, third, fourth time. And so again, it's more of a systemic issue than just Here Lies Love itself. But that's my whole rant on why it's not doing so well. Hopefully you agree. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. I enjoyed this. Go and see this. Please go and see this. Go and see this. And you will not be disappointed. And even if you don't love it, you will definitely have a very unique experience that is far better than seeing something like Back to the Future or MJ the Musical.